Trump just forced Venezuela to hand over 50 million barrels of oil to the United States. And he's saying he's going to personally control the money himself. This sounds like something out of a movie, but it's not. It's completely real. In his own words, Venezuela's new interim authorities will turn over between 30 and 50 million barrels of sanctioned crude oil to America. The oil will be sold at market price, and the cash, he says, will be controlled by him to benefit the people of Venezuela and, of course, the United States. This is a legendary moment for the president as he openly claims the right to sell another country's oil and decide where that money goes. In order for us to fully understand how we got here, you have to know what Venezuela looked like before the raid, what this oil actually means for your wallet, and where it could lead if America decides taking the oil isn't enough. So stick around until the end because you might be shocked what Trump has in store for Americans in the near future. And as always, if you want to see my small channel grow, kind of like the US economy after taking over another country, then please subscribe to my channel. All right, let's get into it. Before US forces grabbed Nicolas Maduro and flew him to New York in handcuffs, Venezuela was already a crude oil giant. Roughly 303 billion barrels of proven reserves, the biggest stash in the whole entire world. For years, politicians in Caracas promised that oil would fund the permanent revolution, pay for social programs, and keep the country rich forever. Then suddenly, it stopped. Under Hugo Chavez and later Maduro, the state tightened its grip on the oil sector. PDVSA, the state oil company, became less of a business and more of a political machine. Loyal party members replaced experienced engineers. Profits that should have gone into maintaining fields, refineries, and pipelines were siphoned into short-term programs and backing networks. Corruption and mismanagement spread. When US sanctions finally landed, they hit an industry that was already in serious trouble. Most of those world-famous reserves sit in the Orinoco Belt. On paper, it's a dream. Endless oil. Can you imagine? In practice, it's extra heavy oil. It's thick, it's tar-like, and difficult to work with. You don't just drill a hole and just expect clean oil to come gushing out of the ground. You need steam-assisted recovery, giant upgraders, special refineries, and a ton of upfront capital. That only works if you have stability, and billions of dollars you're willing to leave in the ground for years before you even earn any back. By around 2010, Venezuela was producing roughly 3 million barrels a day, but shortly after, production started to plunge. Refineries broke down, some literally caught fire. There were storage tanks that sat with oil in them for so long that it actually began to harden. Foreign firms like Total Energies and Exxon took billion-dollar write-downs and walked away. What I mean by this is, imagine you bought a toaster for $20, but later it breaks, or no one wants it anymore. Now it's really only worth $5. A write-down is when you admit the toaster isn't worth $20 anymore, and you change the price on your listing to $5. The broader economy collapses. Hyperinflation made the bolivar, like Venezuela's currency, almost worthless. People watched their life savings evaporate in a matter of months. Basic goods disappeared from shelves, public services fell apart, millions of Venezuelans left, walking across borders or boarding unsafe boats, just trying to find somewhere they could survive. And then steps in China. Beijing cut deals with Caracas. They gave loans and investments up front, paid back in oil over time. That meant tanker after tanker of Venezuelan crude oil headed east, often at steep discounts to feed Chinese refineries and chip away at old debts. For China, it was cheap. Long-term supply outside of US control. But for Washington, it was a big problem. Venezuela, a failed petrostate, was still sitting on huge reserves, and now they're leaning heavily on America's main rival. So when Trump ordered the raid that captured Maduro and installed an interim government, it wasn't just about restoring democracy. It was about flipping that strategic asset. A country that had been drifting towards Beijing suddenly got owned by the US of A. And that's the stage that Trump stepped onto when he made his big oil announcement. After Maduro was removed and Delcy Rodriguez was sworn in as interim president, Trump went online and laid out the next move. Venezuela's new authorities, he said, would be turning over between 30 and 50 million barrels of high-quality, sanctioned oil to the United States of America. He added that the oil would be sold at market price, and that he, as president, would control the money to ensure that it's used to benefit the people of Venezuela and the United States, of course. Okay, but what does a number like 50 million barrels really mean? $55 to $60 a barrel, you're talking about roughly $2.8 to $3 billion worth of crude oil. That's real money for a country that's been broke for years. It's a significant block of supply. But zoom out for a second to the US scale and it looks smaller. America uses around 20 million barrels of petroleum products every day. That means that 50 million barrels is a little over 2 days of national consumption. In other words, this isn't some magic tap that suddenly makes the US energy independent. It's a big one-time jolt. If those barrels arrive when supplies are tight and refineries are hungry, that extra oil can actually help relieve some pressure. More oil going into US refineries means more gasoline and diesel being produced. More product on the market can help nudge prices down, or at least keep them from spiking as much as they otherwise would have. There's also the message it sends. Markets don't just track how many barrels are in storage, they watch how far leaders are willing to go. A US president publicly taking control of a foreign oil and selling it tells traders and other countries, Washington is ready to get their hands greasy. Trump is already framing this in domestic terms. He's tying the move directly to gas prices and the cost of living, saying that getting Venezuelan oil up and running again under US direction will keep prices lower for Americans. The basic logic isn't wrong. Cheaper oil can translate into lower fuel costs over time, and fuel costs are intertwined in almost everything. Every carton of eggs, every phone, every pair of shoes spent part of its life in a truck, a ship, or a plane. Those vehicles burn fuel. When diesel is expensive, shipping companies raise their rates. When shipping is expensive, retailers raise their prices. If you knock fuel costs down, even a little bit, you give the whole system more room to breathe. But rebuilding Venezuela's output would take years of investment and political stability that it doesn't quite have yet. Heavy crude oil is expensive and slow compared to light shale oil. And even if production did surge, there are global markets, climate policies, and other producers to contend with. But on the other hand, energy prices shape pretty much everything. A leader who can credibly say, I pushed supply up and kept your costs down, has a powerful story to tell. Outside the US though, the story sounds very different. China's government has condemned the raid and the oil deal as bullying and a blatant violation of Venezuelan sovereignty. I think it's safe to say that China really does not like to lose. They argue that America is using military force and legal pressure to steal resources from a weaker nation, and they're furious that a country they invested in is now being forced to send oil exclusively to their rival. International law experts point out another uncomfortable fact. Under the basic principles of sovereignty, the oil beneath Venezuela has always belonged to Venezuela as a state. When the country nationalized US oil assets in the 1970s, and again under Chavez, the law didn't say, well, now the oil belongs to America instead. So when Trump says Venezuela stole American oil, and now he's just taking it back, that's a political framing, not a legal one. The reality is that a desperate interim government reliant on US support is agreeing under pressure to ship part of its remaining lifeline out. For a lot of Americans, that nuance won't matter. If this move helps prevent another spike in gas prices or gives even a bit of relief on shipping-driven inflation, they'll take it. For people in places like China, Russia, and across Latin America, it looks more like raw power. The US using its military and financial muscle to redirect someone else's wealth. The bigger question isn't just what this one batch of crude oil does. It's what happens if this is only the beginning. With Maduro gone, an interim government embedded into Washington, and China pushed away from key assets, U.S. oil companies suddenly see opportunity. Chevron already has a presence there under special licenses. Now other U.S. firms and allies are likely drawing up plans to get back in. Analysts at Rystad Energy estimate that getting Venezuela back to something like 2010 output of around 3 million barrels a day would require roughly $180 billion in new investment and at least a decade of consistent work. That means drilling, yes, but also rebuilding refineries, fixing or replacing pipelines, upgrading ports, and cleaning up years of neglect. It's not fast and it's not cheap. And because so much of that oil is heavy and hard to process, most of those projects only make financial sense if global oil prices stay high enough. But if those conditions are met, whoever controls that rebuild stands to gain enormous leverage. If American companies backed by American courts, banks, and security are the ones doing it, then Venezuela's main industry becomes tied to US interest for a very long time. Imagine a Venezuela where its currency is effectively the US dollar. Its biggest employers and tax contributors are US or US-backed oil companies, and its most important contracts are written under US law. On paper, it's still a sovereign country. In practice, it becomes deeply dependent. People joke about the 51st state, but what they're really pointing out is kind of an arrangement. Venezuela will become a place that can't easily say no without risking an economic collapse. For some Venezuelans, after years of chaos, that might not feel like a trade they're willing to make. And for Americans, I'm sure a lot of them, especially the ones in the oil business, this looks like an opportunity of a lifetime. But let me know what you think about Trump's big play in the comments. I'm sure there's a lot more I could cover on this topic, and I'm sure I'll make a video on it in the future. But for now, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next one.